Yeah, we're going to record this and distribute it to folks that weren't able to come, that wanted to come. And I think it's going to be on the website. Anyway, thank you so much for coming and spending part of your day with me today, with us today. I'm just going to make sure that my mic is happening properly. I get it. I'm. It's a really, really busy time of year, and it's a pandemic, and there's so much going on, and so I really appreciate you taking time to be involved in this and show up and listen and share ideas. I'm gonna share my screen. I'll go through a couple of Zoom tips first. Um, just so we all know what we're doing a little bit. I'm gonna share my screen. I have to say everything that I'm doing out loud or I can't do it. Share. Is that working? No. Oh, are you seeing the Zoom basics? Okay.
Yep.
Um, so down at the bottom there's the mute button, which you've obviously already figured out. Stop and start your video. It's great to maybe when you're talking, if you're asking a question or something, or at subsequent sessions in the breakout groups, you have your video on if you don't mind while you're talking. One thing is right now, everyone, it's nice to know who's on the call. And so, right at the top of your picture or your non-picture, if your camera is off, if you hover over the top right part of it, you'll get three dots. It'll say mute, and then next it says three dots. If you click that, you can go to rename. So most people that I see have a very self-explanatory name that says who they are, who they are and what organization they're from. But if your name isn't showing that, if you feel comfortable, could you take a second and do that? So if you click rename, you can say Jamie Leatham, and then I'm going to say Flinrord, and then you can see what organization I'm from. If that's overwhelming and you don't want to do that, that's fine. But if you feel like you can handle that, it would be nice to, then we can look at the participant list and everyone can see who everyone is a little bit. We're too big of a group today to do a go around for introductions. So we're going to do little breakout groups where we meet 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other people. But we won't be meeting everyone at once. Okay, back to Zoom basics. The chat window is a good feature. So there's an arrow there pointing to the chat window. If you have technical problems that you're struggling with, you can type a question in there, and we have some tech support. We have Kavan on the call. He works for the Thompson-Okanagan Tourism Association, and they're a supporter of this work that we're doing or trying to get started. And he has graciously agreed to be lurking in the background for tech support if we need it. And so if you're stuck, feel free to type a question in the chat pane. So you have to click that chat icon that my arrow is pointing to there. And then you can type a question. The other important one is when we're going to have some presentations and then a little bit of time for questions and answers. And if you want to raise your hand, it's under the reactions menu tab down there. So if you click that, then there's one that's a little hand icon, and then we'll call on you. And I've occasionally hit the leave button by mistake, and I like, oh, I didn't mean to leave the meeting, but I did. And so you have to go back to your invite where you clicked the Zoom link to rejoin. Probably no one else does that with me. And then if, depending on the size of your screen or how big your Zoom window is, some of those icons along the bottom won't show up. But if you click the more ... icon, then they will show up. So don't fear. And then I'm a little bit confused because I'm just going to start out with a little bit of context here for what we're even doing here. And you probably know all this already, but um, most of you are here because you have had maybe an interview with myself or Susan in the last year. Um, where's my notes? Sorry, I haven't done a Zoom presentation in a long time. Let me get myself sorted here. Basically, uh, for several years, it's been identified that there is not any kind of umbrella conservation organization operating serving the Thompson or Nicola areas of the province. Um, Conservation programs, there's some that exist in other regions in BC. There's Kootenays, there's some in the Okanagan here, and basically they are an sort of umbrella organization that exists to support conservation work that's happening. So bring together people that are doing stewardship and conservation work, get them talking to each other. Maybe there's ways to collaborate. Maybe there's efficiencies that can be developed from everybody knowing what everyone else is doing. It's just kind of a support organization, and it's not meant to be a new thing that takes, that's more funding competition for work that's already being done. It's meant to sort of augment and support that work that's already being done. And so the province and I think a bunch of conservation groups sort of recognized that there wasn't a group like that in the Thompson-Nicola. And so we thought, well, let's ask if there's appetite for that and what it could look like and what people who are actually doing this work already think. I'm probably taking way too long. Eh? How are we doing for time, Kelly? So, let's see here. Basically, where we're at now, this phase one was where we started. We did some interviews and some background research to see what people thought. That resulted in a couple of documents, which is this ecosystem summary, lessons learned, and situation analysis, which basically said, here's what people think. Lessons learned is from other conservation programs in BC. What did they think? And we're going to present basically those results today. And then phase two is these workshops where we share the results. And then in subsequent workshops on the 9th and the 13th, we're going to do small groups to propose and discuss key elements of a conservation organization, like what people said, what it could look like, and decide some next steps and identify participants and roles. And ideally launch some kind of regional conservation organization. I'm going to talk more about the dry interior in my later presentation, so I'm going to skip over it. But basically, it's the drier areas, a lot of grasslands in the Thompson-Nicola that have the most species at risk and have a lot of conservation concerns. We used the boundary of the TNRD as the starting point for talking about the Thompson-Nicola area. It's a huge area focusing on the dry interior portion, that red portion, and it's the green portion on the smaller map, does help to focus it a bit. And the dry interior has been identified by Environment Canada as one of 11 priority places in Canada to focus landscape level ecosystem based conservation strategies. So the goals of this workshop that I've kind of already said was to today share the interview results, gather questions. Ideally, the ultimate goal is to actually launch some kind of an organization. But today we're going to share results. Oops. And then at the next two workshops, we're going to kind of try and hammer out some of the details like goals and objectives, priority areas to start with, and some governance, and then define next steps and roles. So today, this is our agenda. I'm doing the workshop overview and taking horribly long. We're going to do a little icebreaker where we go into small groups and meet a few people and then have a few presentations. The break is around 10:50. And just to orient you, this is event number 1, like I said, sharing and caring. And then events 2, the next one will be where we sit down and try and hammer out some details. And I think that's it. Yes. Sorry, that took so long. It's hard to talk when you're just staring at a screen and no people.
There's no audience.
I know. Where's the laughing?
Jamie, you just have a question here quickly in the chat for you or for somebody else on the working group. Is it also the goal of Glenroy to implement federal SARA recovery strategies?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Perfect.
In a word, yes.
I like it. That was great context, and it is really helpful for everybody to understand what today looks like and what the rest of the workshops will look like as well. So we are going to move into the breakout, but before we do, I just want to give the rest of the working group members and Susan an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'll just call out your names, and if you don't mind popping in and just introducing yourself and who you are and your role on the working group really quickly. Brad, we'll start with you.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Brad Arner. I'm with the Grassland Conservation Council, and I've been on the working group since the beginning. And our interests obviously are the Grassland Council, the grasslands of the interior. And so when this came about, I thought it was a really good opportunity to see what we can do and be hopefully be a moving part of this going forward. I look forward to meeting everybody in the groups later on.
Great. Thanks, Brad. And Scott?
My name is Scott Boswell. I'm the program manager for the Okanagan Collaborative Conservation Program. And I've been involved with the group since the beginning as well. I have a strong interest. I grew up in Kamloops area. My parents used to run the fishing resort on Bonaparte Lake, so I'm very familiar with the area and really looking forward to working with people in that region to maybe hopefully set something up. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Danielle? No, Danielle? Okay.
I know she's here. I don't think she's here today.
Okay. How about Darcy? Also no? I'm just working down the working group membership list. So Todd?
He's here.
You're here.
I'm here. Hi, everyone. I'm Todd Kemper. I'm a conservation biologist and planner with the Canadian Wildlife Service branch of Environment Climate Change Canada. So I'm leading a conservation planning initiative for the dry interior valleys of British Columbia. So I'm very keen to see this group be successful and get off the ground. So happy to meet you all.
Awesome. Thank you. And I don't see off the top of my screen here, Glenn or Bryn on the call. Are they on either? Okay. Susan, how about you? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Susan Abs. I have a small company, Eclipse Environmental, and I've been doing this for a few decades. I spoke to almost all of you, I think, at some point in the last year. I live in Vancouver, but the reason I got involved here is that I have worked off and on with the South Okanagan Similkameen Conservation Program and OCCP with Scott's group for 5 or 6 years. So I got familiar with these kinds of organizations and also the dry interior, spent a lot of time there. Yeah, so I am working as a consultant to the working group. And the idea was that this is eventually going to be an independent member-run group. So they wanted to start out with having an independent analysis done by a consultant. And yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting you all. This was supposed to be in person, of course, but here we are. We're just going to try to advance it as much as we can until we can meet again. I feel like I've been on a journey through the Thompson-Nicola, though I know it so well from talking to you. So thank you for all your interviews, and talk to you later.
Awesome. Thank you. And is there anybody on the working group that I missed? Okay. So like Jamie said, we're going to break you up into small groups. Susan is going to do that now. And so you don't have to do anything with Zoom. It's great. You just get moved into a group and then you get moved back in when the time is up. So if you could just say your name and your organization and what drew you to this event, that would be great. We'll have, well, roughly 10 minutes, just a little shy of that to do so. So the next time you see me, it'll be after your group and you come back into the main room. And Susan, I'll get you to pop them.
Or is this our group? We stayed in the main room?
Didn't have to move. Just the two of us and Susan, I guess.
It
I
didn't,
guess so,
that
yeah.
that didn't
Oh.
work. It only,
I know, I'm starting over, everyone.
Oh,
recreate.
I have to wait
Oh,
for
it
them
was
to
a
close. They're gonna
mistake.
close in 30 seconds and then I'll reboot.
Okay.
It did, I had them all set up, but it only did our previous group. It didn't have the new people. That's what happened.
Yeah.
So it's closing in 20 seconds. We had them
Like
set
we
up-
said, I was gonna say, we started with be patient with technology and
Exactly.
we did
We
some
had them
humor.
set up with the 8 of us ahead of time and it only used the 8 of us. That's what happened. So I have to recreate. Yes, thanks. All right, recreate.
Hey, Susan,
Yeah,
I was the only one in my breakout group.
I have to start over again. I have to start over again. Here it comes.
Okay,
The problem is when I start over, it takes an entire minute. So when they're going to shut in 20 seconds, and then I'm going to, uh-oh, I see. Okay. 10 seconds. Somebody in the chat doesn't have video, so I have to get them to go. Okay.
We had a minute.
That was quick.
You
That was
only gave
fast.
us a minute, Susan.
Keep talking.
I was halfway through my introduction.
I'm sorry. I accidentally closed them. They're being opened again right now.
It's like speed dating, but super fast.
It only showed 3 groups. So I thought, uh-oh, I've got to make 8. But here you go.
You only gave us a minute, I think, wasn't
Yeah.
that it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Because it only showed 3 groups, Jamie.
okay.
So I had to recreate it as 8.
Maybe don't give 10 minutes at this point though.
But yeah,
So like 4 minutes or something now.
sorry, I'm fired. It's okay.
5 should be good.
We have 5 minutes.
Kelly, you can do it next time.
Oh, there you go. Comment that 3 of the 6 members were introduced in that minute. So we just need part-time now.
Oh, it didn't.
Oh, different groups.
Wow.
So now we get to meet more people.
I already know most of you. I actually know all of you. Hi, Kristen. Do you want to introduce yourself? Because other people might not know you.
We're still on the whole.
Oh, well, at least we're a bit of a little group.
Oh, yeah, mine says 8 participants.
We're unassigned.
Oh,
Oh, so are we still in the main?
Yeah, I
We're
think
the, we're the leftovers.
Yeah,
Okay.
but that's okay. 'cause
Oh.
it looks like everybody else is in their group. So
That's good.
okay. Well, I'll introduce myself. Hi, I'm Kristen Mancuso. I work with Okanagan Nation Alliance in Penticton, but some of our member communities are out in the Thompson-Nicola area. So I'm excited to learn more about some of the conservation initiatives and work that's going on in the region, and looking forward to meeting everyone else on the call.
nice to meet you, Kristen.
Thanks.
Kristen, I'm going to put you in another group.
Okay.
You can leave me here, Susan.
I don't know about the unassigned thing. I don't know why that happens. Is that because you're hosts? No,
I don't know.
it was, I just assigned everybody randomly.
That's okay. They're all in groups now. So
Yeah. That's right. Now I see that Chief Donna has no video and can only use chat. I don't know what to do.
well, if she can hear us and she can,
I have no video. I can only use chat to communicate.
Yeah, that's not uncommon. I've had that before in meetings.
So
Not everybody has the same access to,
I should respond to her though.
yeah, I would respond and just let her ask if she can hear everything okay and see everything, and then I'll keep an eye on the chat. I don't see that message for some reason.
Oh,
That was a personal message, I feel. I mean, I'm not seeing that message yet.
Oh, so she sent it to you directly,
she
Susan.
sent it to everyone.
Oh, I don't see it.
That's very weird.
Which
And I can't
I
respond.
have no video. Oh yeah.
You see it?
No video and can only use chat to communicate. But that's fine, right? Like we don't need everyone to use the video. And that's common. That's
I
across
can't
the board.
respond to her. I can't answer her.
Oh, you can't? Oh, just
No, if I try to click on her or find her, I
Can you just type in the message to her though?
is she? Yeah, because right now, effectively, is she on the meeting right now? Is she in the meeting?
don't know because we're all in groups.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
once we come back from the group, we'll be able to. Yeah, but yeah,
Let's look at the timing here, Kelly. This was supposed to be icebreaker till 10:05. We're actually okay. How long have we been in it?
I don't know. I didn't set the,
I would say that let's just stay on this schedule then.
okay.
No, maybe
well, I have
I'll end it in.
Jamie starting at 10 was the schedule. So
Oh,
in the
schedule
participant
started-
agenda that I have open that you sent me initially on the last one, it says 10 to 10:20 conservation status. That's the penultimate copy that we looked at. I haven't been sent a new one since then.
Okay, well, then I should probably start ending it now because then we're 10:01. Is that okay?
I think they've had time. Yeah, you could do that.
Because there's a minute left, so.
And next time, Susan, it'll be better if we can have a breakout room for us as well, like an admin breakout room.
Yeah, I'll start making notes. Admin breakup room.
Yeah, because yeah.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Kelly.
No problem. We're just going to wait for everybody to get back because there's still 37 seconds left.
I accidentally left my room.
That's okay. They were closing.
At least you didn't accidentally leave the whole meeting. That happens
Yeah.
when I leave my room sometimes.
Yeah.
Hi, Rob.
Oh, Rob, good.
Carmen, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Hey, taking a day off my my cycling routine.
Yeah, taking a day off of retirement, hey?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a good chat with Courtney last night. He was over for a few minutes.
Oh, good.
Okay. So I think everybody is back. Let's just give it another minute. Susan, are you seeing everything closed now? I can't see the breakouts.
The number says 46 on the bottom. So is that the number when we're in a breakout room, or does it change?
I think we're all back.
Right.
I think I think we're back. You're right. Okay, perfect. And we're even still on time, so we're good. So sorry about the hiccups. I'm glad that I started out by saying we should have grace and a sense of humor with technology today. And we did. So I'm glad you had an opportunity just to quickly introduce yourselves. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Jamie. Jamie is going to discuss conservation status, and then we're going to have a little question and answer period after that. So Jamie, it's all yours.
Okay, am I muted?
No.
No, that's embarrassing. Okay, let me just start my slide. So, and then let me share my screen. Share screen, this one. Okay, can you see it? Oh, now you can see it. Okay. Alrighty, so I just thought I would start with a quick little roundup of species at risk, species and ecosystems at risk in the Thompson-Nicola. One of the first things we did when we started thinking about a conservation group for the area was to say, well, let's get someone to do a little summary of the very sort of Western science perspective of what species are there, what are most at risk, what other, sensitive ecosystems and things like that. So this is very much a roundup from that perspective of species that are considered to be threatened or at risk of becoming endangered. I understand that conservation is a way broader thing than just, counting numbers and enumerating species that are having a hard time, but this is just sort of that province of BC perspective. And so let's see if I said anything. Oh, I'm gonna start my timer here. Hold on a second. Okay. And let's see. Okay, next slide. So we started this conversation thinking about the Thompson-Nicola in general, and the sort of simplest boundary was the Thompson-Nicola Regional District boundary, just more for convenience, not because we're specifically affiliated with the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, although we have people, I believe Mike is from there. Anyway, we hope to have them on board. It's a giant area, as you know, and there's lots of different ecosystems and land types and First Nation communities and cities and things within that. But it serves as a starting point for at least having a discussion. And I should reiterate what Susan mentioned, is that it is the province and using some federal funding that got this wanted to get this conversation off the ground. But ideally, or the intent is to create a non-governmental small organization that would help support conservation type work that's happening in the area. And so it's not a government-led initiative. It's more like, hey, we heard that this was a need and we were able to get some funding for it. Let's talk about it and make it happen. So yeah, the Thompson-Nicola is 45,000 square kilometers, 133,000 people, most of those in Kamloops. It encompasses traditional territory of at least 5 nations, Secwepemc, St'át'imc, Tsilhqot'in, Nklaka'pamc, and Syilx. And that's a lot of people. And it has rivers and lakes in it, as you might imagine. Some of the province's big, significant rivers, like the Fraser and the Thompson. And it also has movement corridors, helping wildlife and plants, I guess, to some degree, move around the province. It's got those big river corridors. So like some corridors along the Fraser River connect species to the lower mainland and the Caribou, while the Shuswap corridor provides access to the Okanagan. And it's important for conservation as a piece of the province. I mean, everywhere is, but it has specific values that make it a really important place to look at conservation in, and I'll talk about that more a bit later. And so it's a giant area. One of the ways that we initially focused who we reached out to and what kind of things we started talking about is by looking at this dry interior. So it's a concept, it's shown in red there. It's a concept of, it's the most at-risk habitats, containing a lot of the species at risk in the entire region. It's the dry valley bottom grasslands for the most part, and some of the lower elevation interior Douglas fir. It doesn't have a lot of existing parks or protected areas. And it does face some of the highest threats from urban and rural development and invasive species and other threats. It also aligns with the federal government's focus, well, it is the federal government's focus, one of 11 places in Canada that they've decided to focus funding on for making ecosystem-based multi-species conservation strategies. And there's 11 places in Canada. There's 2 in BC. One's the dry interior, which is all 3 colors that you see on the map there. And then the other one is in the south coast of Vancouver area, south coast of the mainland. It was chosen by Environment and Climate Change Canada and Canadian Wildlife Service through their analysis because of overlap with other important biodiversity values, including migratory bird habitat and priority wetland habitats in waterfowl management, as well as the perceived opportunities for partnership and collaboration among Indigenous people, other government and non-government organizations, industry, and other resource users. There's more about this kind of thing in the situation analysis. That's one of the documents that came out of all the interviews that we did in talking to everyone. The dry interior of the Thompson-Nicola is generally that green part in the middle of the map. And sorry that it's completely illegible, but Kamloops is at the top right of the green blob. So I'm just going to do a quick and dirty summary of species at risk in the Thompson-Nicola and dry interior. So there's federally listed species at risk in Canada under the Species at Risk Act, or SARA. So there's 43 of those species listed for the dry interior portion of the TNRD boundary, and 57 within that greater Thompson-Nicola boundary. So a 78 or something, 75% of those species are in that dry interior. There's 120 species listed in BC. So there's BC has blue list and red list, which are designations for whether species are considered to be endangered, threatened, or at risk, or sorry, special concern, or vulnerable, I guess it is. Oopsie, I keep clicking. And then we can also talk about ecological communities at risk. So these are generally plant associations that create necessary habitats that support a lot of species at risk. So what do we got for these? Like black cottonwood, common snowberry, and roses. A lot of the riparian or, adjacent to water ecosystems tend to be the at-risk ones. Trembling aspen, common snowberry, Kentucky bluegrass. Anyway, there's a bunch of these, as well as ponderosa pine and blue bunch wheatgrass. So let's see. Yeah, so that's just an example of some species at risk. If we look at a map again of this Thompson-Nicola, this map here just shows different sources of species at risk location data. That big chunk of blue and purple in the top right is a lot of caribou telemetry work. And then other areas represent other at-risk species. And you can see that the concentrations of those dots and species at risk is generally in the dry interior. What do we got next? I got my notes on a different screen here. So critical habitat is something that gets mapped under the Federal Species at Risk Act. It's the habitat that is designated as necessary to support the recovery of that species or the existence of that species. So right now there's been critical habitat listed and mapped for these 10 species. And toothcup is a little cute plant. Whitebark pine, Mexican mosquito fern is an aquatic plant. And that, again, that big red part in the top, in the northern part is caribou, but the rest of it maps pretty well with the dry interior area. That said, I know that many organizations have interest in things beyond the sort of low elevation grasslands and forests, and a lot of the Indigenous organizations we spoke to, their main concerns tend to be more around like crown land and forestry and resource extraction. So that'll be interesting when we get together in our small groups to sort of see what overlaps there are in conservation concerns. Culturally important species. And this sort of came out of our interviews, but less of the, tiny plants and animals that are at risk and more about the ones that are important for culture and for way of life. So fisheries and watersheds and steelhead and salmon and elk, moose and caribou and bighorn sheep. And of course, they're the habitats and the plants and medicine plants and areas that are also really important. So just to sort of contrast that with the more Western science perspective of enumerating populations and species at risk and the tiny little flowers that may not figure in people's lives that much. Some of the main threats, and I mean, as an audience, you're all doing conservation work, so this is probably not news to you. When we're talking about a lot of the dry interior and the more private land areas, it's things like urban and agricultural development, and those pressures are highest in the dry interior and on private land. But in other areas, there's lots of other things. As I said, like forestry and resource extraction and dams are a big threat to bigger picture watershed health and fisheries. And then other things like, oops, I got a mistake there. Fire dynamics, I think meant fire dynamics, but road mortality, which is like amphibians and I guess everything getting hit on the road, invasive species. Livestock can pose threat to some species. Persecution is like where people go out and kill snakes on purpose and things like that. And I'm gonna motor along because I have about 1 minute. This slide just talks about what kind of land we're talking about and who has, at least on paper, authority over it. And so you can see a huge chunk of the whole TNRD is Crown land, although when you get into the dry interior, it's less. Some of it's reserve, some of it's only a small portion of it's federal land. And the problem with that is that I discussed critical habitat briefly. Oops, there, I'm done. Critical habitat only really has power to protect things on federal lands. The province has an agreement with the federal government to provide effective protection for critical habitat, but in practice, it's really poor. And the province was starting to work on a Species at Risk Act that would have made there be some more teeth to that effective protection piece, but that's been shelved, and I'm not sure why or yeah. Oh God, I have so many more slides. We have some great maps that were done about showing how much land is in, like, I guess, provincial or federal protected areas. This map shows grasslands, which are some of the most vulnerable places. I'm going to whip through these, but rest assured they're in the Species at Risk summary document that's available on the website. And I'm happy to talk more individually with folks about these because I'm having to whip through, but we have mapping of fisheries sensitive watersheds, and all of this mapping and analysis can be used as a way for this group to focus on to figure out what to focus on and what areas or what issues to focus on first. There's ungulate winter range. So these areas have been identified by the province as necessary for, and I think that makes them have restrictions on forestry practices, but I'm not totally sure. There's agricultural land reserve, which stops them from intensive development, like housing development, but they're still open to threats from agricultural practices. I'm not going to go through these, but basically conservation is important. It happens, or it's considered at different scales. People have different priorities. I totally can't wait to hear how, when we come together and talk about what our priorities are, how the sort of similarities and commonalities rise to the top, and we get to figure out some steps forward. Thank you for listening. And yeah, sorry that was so quick, but have a look at the document that's online. I'll send around the link again, but it has this stuff in more detail. And even just the executive summary basically talks about what I talked about. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. And we're still going to allow some time for question and answer because we have extra time baked into the schedule for maneuverability. When we start out the question and answer here, Tracy has a question or something that would be good to clarify, Jamie. You mentioned that the BC government is not working to uphold SARA and that plans were shelved. Could you clarify that in a little more detail so that we have some reassurance that they are working on it?
I guess I can't speak for the province, but I just know that in my work, when we get referrals about proposed development on critical habitat, if it's private land, if it's crown land, if it's private land, there is very little we can do. The province is supposed to provide effective protection, but we don't get a say over what, and we don't have the legislation to say what people can do on critical habitat or not. So we make recommendations. In terms of crown land, like forestry activities, and I am less involved in that. And so and I know that there's like best management practices and guidance and things like that. But as we all know, when it comes to business and land values and things like that, it's very, very difficult to, without any species at risk legislation, to enforce protection of critical habitat. And so the idea is that the federal government, if they see we're not doing a good enough job, and I'm totally oversimplifying and, probably not wearing my government hat properly, but the federal government can step in and say, you're not living up to your agreement, we're going to take over, which is what I understand happened in the case of Caribou, but they don't have the capacity to do that for everything. And so in reality, there's not good, in my mind, speaking frankly, there's not good protection at all for critical habitat by the province or, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jamie.
Jamie, or Kelly, can I add on to that briefly?
Sorry,
that would be good. Yeah, and then we have a few questions in the chat. Go ahead, Robin.
Sure. Yeah, I was just I think Jamie said most of it. I was just gonna add that, yeah, there are various legislations that apply on crown land and various, stewardship activities that the province is involved in, to aim to provide effective protection. Of course, there's debate about how well that is for different species in different areas, I'm sure. And then, yeah, on private land, there is no specific legislation, but there is, under the Local Government Act, local governments have the ability to take action, but of course they have limited resources as well. And so we're largely relying on private land stewardship, on private lands in a lot of cases, which is why this initiative is so great.
Thanks, Robin. And Tracy pointed out in the chat what I was going to point out as well is the silk forestry standards are working to improve these gaps. And
awesome.
I'm sitting with Pam and Ray from the district with Tracy and the ONA on, and that's taking my facilitator hat off for a moment and my other hat back on working on this and trying to change that. And hopefully we will be able to implement the silk forestry standards. So we have a few more questions here. How were the fishery sensitive areas determined? The accompanying report doesn't seem to include methods unless I missed it.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't. I think those maps were included at the end as just like, here's some other resources. And so maybe Robin can speak more to that, but I wasn't involved in that and I don't know where you can.
Yeah, I was only peripherally involved, but I can provide. So it's a type of legal designation that falls under the Forest and Range Practices Act. And I will provide a link. And so it was a kind of multi-year project working with multiple groups within and outside of government to kind of develop those and implement them. And I can, so then there's mapped areas and then objectives for forest licensees that then they have to incorporate those into their forest stewardship plans. But if you want to connect with me directly, I can provide more information on that.
Okay, thank you, Robin. And I'll leave it to Nicole to connect with you directly. And Richard, I see you've answered your own question. So are there other questions? Oh, okay, Nicole, go ahead. You've got your hand up.
Sorry, I actually just flipped it back down, but I will ask the question because I guess I'm a bit curious about the species at risk, the aquatic species at risk that were considered. And I know that the report flags a few that are listed under SARA, sturgeon being one of them, and cutthroat trout and a few others of special concern. But there are a number of COSEWIC assessed species at risk. So they're not listed under SARA, but they are flagged as at risk, salmon and steelhead being a number of the different groups there. And that to me is a very important piece that should be captured in those maps if they aren't. And I just can't tell if they are. So yes, I will follow up with Robin to connect a bit more and making sure that the information is more fulsome. DFO wasn't really brought into this process until quite late as far as I can tell. So I think might be some more information to share.
Great, thank you, Nicole, appreciate that. Are there any other questions for Jamie at this time? Okay, thank you very much, Jamie. In that case, we are going to move on to Susan and Scott and their discussion on lessons learned, and then we'll have another short question and answer period, and then you'll have your break. So I will leave it to Susan and Scott. You're muted, Susan.
Is this thing on?
Yeah, now.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to do the presentation and Scott will join for the Q&A since he is with a conservation partnership. And I also wanted to mention that I'm speaking from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I'm sorry that a goblin sent a message to everyone that was supposed to go to one person. Somebody grabbed my mouse. So I had two jobs, and one was to interview other partnerships, as James has been talking about. Since they exist already, why not find out what they've learned? They've been in place between 5 and 20 years. There are at least 9 or 10. We talked to 9. And I did talk to coordinators and program managers from those 9, and this is what we learned. And was done as a background so that the folks on the Thompson-Nicola, they don't have to copy it, but they can go ahead and see, well, what are the do's and the don'ts? So as mentioned by Jamie, the goal of this entire phase 1 is to do this background work so that we could find out, is there interest in doing a conservation program of some kind, of a group in the Thompson-Nicola, and possibly looking at this model of a regional partnership. And so this piece is called the Lessons Learned from 9 Conservation Partnerships. And the idea was to analyze that background. And I even directly asked people, do you have any advice? If you were starting over again, what would you do? What would you not do? And so this is all embedded in the report, which is on the website with the other 2 reports that we've just linked. So these are the groups I talked to. And in the report, you can go to their websites and link to find out the kinds of things they've been doing. The purpose of this, as I mentioned, is to provide some background and as a resource. And it's important to note that none of the information in the 2 reports I'm presenting are the views of the working group or me. They're my attempt to synthesize. But I do include a lot of quotes in both of the reports, and I put them in italics because it gives you a sense of the way people are thinking, and it kind of colors the ideas. So one of the things I asked was, what were the benefits? Like, what have you found? And what was really interesting was talking to the people in the Thompson-Nicola about what they thought might be the benefits were almost exactly parallel to what had been proven in other regions. I won't read them all. I think they're pretty obvious because you're the ones that told me what they were. They're listed more or less in the order of priority. So people said, you know, really it's all about meeting each other, then finding out what can we do that we can't do as small organizations and projects on our own. How do we become more efficient and effective to take all these great groups and get them focused together? Collaborate on specific projects, not everything. Sometimes projects are delivered by member groups, sometimes they collaborate. Certainly there's a sciencey part, data and information. One important role is these regional partnerships fill in a gap that is midway, you know, sort of one level down from the federal and provincial level, but really taking it down. It's actually not midway. Oh yeah, it is between provincial and local. So there's lots you can do at the local level, and then there's the provincial level, but this just takes that intermediate perspective. Then there's just all of the advantages of sharing people, resources, even fundraising strategies and ideas. And capacity building came up lots, that by being part of an organization like this, people learn from each other. Governance, a boring word, but we all know that if you're going to have an organization, you have to figure out how to organize, you know, how to set it up. What's the structure? How are people going to relate? All of them are quite different, but in general, most of them have two tiers. They have an organizational leadership group, a steering committee type thing that keeps things going all year round through meetings. And then the partner, sort of a partner level where they meet maybe once a year or twice a year, and the face-to-face meetings, or they keep in touch, and that's how they keep the partnership going, because everybody's too busy with their own projects to be meeting all the time. The regional organization tends to facilitate the communication among the members and coordination among programs and decisions, but members often deliver the projects. Sometimes they form action teams saying, you know, we want to be part of this, but really, I'm really interested in the science or just the stewardship. And so they fill that in. And in some regions, it's not that common yet, but it's something that came up possibly for the Thompson-Nicola, is subgroups and subregions might form and say, let's just look at issues in our valley or our watershed. They gave a bunch of tips. They said, when you get started, we recommend just staying as an informal collaboration. None of them have registered as nonprofits, as far as I can tell. They found that by not doing that, they can be more flexible, they can adapt over time, and there's less of that kind of paperwork that's involved in being a charity. They said, yeah, you need lots of committed leaders and champions to get it going. That's what part of this workshop is about. But don't just rely on them. Rotate people through the leadership group to make sure that everyone stays involved with it as a regional effort. Offer options for various sizes. If you're a small group, maybe you just want to come once a year and get the newsletter. Other people, other groups may say, no, we really want to be at the leadership level, or we want to run an action team. They all said, look, we adapted it. We didn't copy anyone. We looked at everyone else and we tailored it to the region. So they suggested that you do that too, and allow things to evolve over time. Many of them said, you know, sometimes we're big, sometimes we're small, sometimes we have a lot of programs, sometimes we sort of take it easy for a couple of years waiting for funding. So these were suggestions. In terms of tips about who should belong and how to get the partners on board, members, partners, I'm using interchangeably because they use different terms. They said it's great to have a diverse group, and it's great to bring different perspectives on the landscape, but make sure that everyone who's involved has a focus, you know, decide together what's our focus, because if it gets too broad, then you might kind of lose energy. They all mentioned that it's important to have those obvious core groups. Many of you are here today that all they do full-time is conservation and all they work on is biodiversity, but it's very important to also involve all those actions, those whose actions affect biodiversity, that is different sectors, industry, business, the communities, and work closely with them through the program and make sure that you develop those links. They said that sometimes in the beginning, it can be, people don't quite trust each other. They haven't worked together before. They may even have had some bad experiences. So go slowly and build trust, actually do some things together, have in-person workshops, which we're not doing now, but just build it slowly so that people have a chance to get to know each other. ensuring science and technical support is key, including whether that be academics, researchers, and traditional ecological knowledge keepers. A big question mark, and it did come up when I was doing the interviews, is what's the role of government in these things? If it's not government run and it's run by the members, what's their role? Well, and I say CP, these are other conservation partnerships. They're all member driven, they're all independent of government, but all of them work closely with Indigenous governments and groups in the area and with senior and local government bodies, because those are the groups that have legal rights, mandates, and powers. And so they have to be involved, because that's what you have to work with within that institutional framework. Almost all of them work really closely with regional and local governments. And they find it really important to cultivate those relationships. And one group said, look, take them out for coffee, take them out for lunch. If they don't come to the meetings, just see, can you grab a coffee with a local council member or with a local Indigenous leader, and just make those connections. They said government right now seems, in a lot of cases, is understaffed and under-resourced. So how can you find ways to complement what they're doing through all of the great resources that are available through NGOs, academics, and other communities? All the groups are committed, because we are in British Columbia, this is what we do, are committed to respecting Indigenous title and rights and meaningful involvement. In the past, that participation has varied because the local Indigenous groups had competing priorities and they were capacity issues. But what they said, that they thought it was great that we were starting out. The tip is early involvement by Indigenous communities, capacity building options, and offering support for involvement would be the way to go. They'll emphasize the importance of having a scientific foundation. Everything you're going to do, you're going to be out there trying to fundraise and raise awareness about your programs. Almost all of them did what we've already started with the conservation analysis that Jamie just presented, which is to do some sort of an overview to develop science-based critical conservation needs, so that you can show people this is what we're doing and here's why. Not all the groups did a regional conservation strategy or plan, where they then turn that analysis into some sort of priorities. Some did, some didn't. And the ones that did have found it very valuable. And others have said, we didn't see the need for a formal strategy, but we have lots of technical information. All of them try to combine Western science, traditional ecological knowledge, and local knowledge. And a big tip that they said is, if you're going to do some science and technical work, don't just do like some sort of massive 3-year project where you gather all the existing information. Try to find out where are the gaps and what do people need, and then use your science to design some practical conservation tools and guidance. They said it's really important in the early days to get together and have some kind of a document. You can decide what it is, a terms of reference, a charter, a statement. There are lots of examples where you set out and work together to define a vision, goals, and the guidelines by which you will communicate and collaborate. And then some also go the step of having a strategic plan that's separate from a regional conservation strategy. That's an organizational plan where you say, okay, for the next 3 years, we're going to focus on these 5 things. And then your programming all falls into those things. And some people said, oh, we didn't do a whole plan, but every 2 years we get together and we list 5 strategic priorities or 10 or whatever. More and more, as you probably know, funders are asking for, how do you show the results? Like, you funded this great program, but we don't know what the results are. So there's more and more use of these accountability frameworks, so that you say, here are the measurable results we're trying to achieve, and this is what we did. And this helps again to focus. This is the boring part, but they all said, make sure you have a good organizational setup. You've got to have somewhere in the group, whether it's with the steering committee or staff, which could be a contractor, you have to have certain skill sets. How do you do program planning? How do you administer? How do you write proposals? You folks do this stuff all the time, but they said that skill set has to be there, and that's what keeps things going. They all emphasized the value of a full-time coordinator or program manager. If you can manage to fund one, these groups have grown and shrunk over time depending on this. And sometimes if they don't have a coordinator, their activities tend to taper off. So it seems to be an important role if you can even a part-time person. And they're the people that provide the continuity, keep things moving along. They said that effective communication is essential, focusing both on internal and external. Again, this is sort of obvious in any kind of group, but especially in a collaborative. They focused on, let's decide right at the beginning what processes you're going to use. Face-to-face meetings, they said, were essential. Let's hope that sometime in the next year we can do that. That's where the relationships are built, the networking. They also focused, we're all field people, at least I am, and anything out in the field is a real way to build collaboration and keep people motivated. One person said, don't just sit around in Kamloops having meetings. You got to get out there and see each other's projects and see all the good examples. But at the same time, you need the virtual contacts. One group said, we weren't doing anything for about 2 years, but we had a newsletter and we just kept people up to date, and that kept us going. External communications are really important, actually forming a profile and a presence so that the public, the funders, and the media know there's a go-to, and they can see you as an independent, neutral party that can really produce results. Some groups have a formal communication strategy where they develop a logo and brand and that kind of thing. The tools are obvious: newsletters, social media, etc. Funding is always a challenge. I'm not committing Thompson River University here, but there was a lot of interest when I did the interviews there. So they said, work with us, because we do have access to students and sometimes to research funds. So the other programs provided a lot of suggestions. One of the things they pointed out is partnerships are really attractive to funders. So use that, develop collaborative projects that are innovative and will get attention. Make sure you've got committed steering committee champions. Usually that means people that are connected with funders or funding ideas, because that's part of their role. A lot of groups have cost sharing and fee for service. They have cost sharing with, let's say, local governments, or they run seminars online or in person and they collect fees for that. If you can't get funding from government foundations in the private sector, maybe you can get in-kind office, computer equipment. As I mentioned, universities already. A couple of them said, even small amounts of funding, if the groups commit, that helps to reinforce their membership. And the local conservation fund is something that's used in, I believe there are 4 of them, somebody can correct me. And they're based on a fee, parcel fee, or some sort of a regional or local government fee that goes into a large fund, and it's independently administered, and community groups can apply for funding. So that's a model, and there's a guide on how to do it. And lastly, what did we learn from other groups about successful program areas? They said it's nice to have a mix of regional and local scale programs and projects, just to keep that feel of the 2 levels on the interaction. So for example, a regional conservation plan or strategy, a securement strategy could be done at the regional level, whereas you would have a lot of the stewardship and restoration might be local. Oh, and Richard Doucette says, don't forget about industry when looking for funding partners. I think I did say business and industry there. Thanks, Richard. A lot of them said, look, start lowly with some low-hanging fruit projects, things that everybody wants to do. Let's get going. And then you can build those relationships, show that you're successful, and people will be attracted to something that's working. And then increase your scale and reach over time. And a lot of groups review every 1 or 2 years. They go back to the members and say, is this still working for you? Are we serving you? And then they recalibrate if it isn't. Yeah, let's take the comments afterwards because they look good. And I'm just going to go through very quickly then. The most successful areas from those groups have been securement, because it works really well to look at a regional level. So all the groups that are involved in acquisition and management of protected areas get together. They might have a formal team, or they just stay in touch all the time, and they start looking at who's best to look at certain properties. Working with local government, as I mentioned, very strong niche for these groups, because a lot can be done at the local government level, and there's a lot of interest at that level. There are tons of resources online for local governments to do conservation work, environmental work, whether it be conservation or water, air, climate change. There's a ton. And the role of the conservation partnership is often provide technical support, mapping, and guidance. And some groups work entirely on that. In the Comox Valley, that's all they do. They just work with the regional government. So stewardship, obviously, very important because of all of the species and ecosystems at risk that are on private land, as Jamie pointed out. And also a lot of them are on working landscapes that, you know, the industry and the sectors want to keep as working landscapes. So it's a great opportunity. Most programs have similar target groups, and they find by working together as a partnership, they can say, oh, we're all going after the same target groups. Let's start to work together and harmonize stewardship, you know, collect data across different land tenures and management regimes. You've got private, public land, crown land, protected areas. There's a great role in a regional group like this for saying, can we start using the same data? Can we start using the same practices? And of course, community awareness and education. More and more that's being attached to the larger project rather than just a one-off. Oh, let's do some, you know, education with schools. If you attach that to a stewardship group or protected area, it can be more powerful. Conclusion from talking to these other groups, they were enthusiastic. And what's nice for the Thompson-Nicola is you can see that there's a proven record that these groups work, and programs are strong, and they have actually, did we interview? Yes, we did. Just a second, we'll take the question.
Okay, we'll do the questions at the end. I have a few for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, sorry, I shouldn't be looking. So the point being, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And not only can you be inspired by these groups, but they meet annually and they're interested in what you're doing and they're open to networking. And there are many collaborative partnerships and programs already underway in the Thompson-Nicola, and I'm going to talk about them more in the situation analysis. I'm done.
Hey, thank you. So yeah, we did have a few comments here. Celia Nord, and Celia's from the Adams Lake Band, had said including Indigenous perspective would be helpful as well. And don't forget about First Nations as partners. So I'm not sure if you would like to elaborate further, Celia, or if Susan or Scott would like to comment.
Sure, I can jump in. Certainly, I think with any conservation organization, especially starting today, it's essential that First Nations are an integral part of any of the formation of this group and actually fully involved in all the projects that this new initiative would take on.
Okay.
Yeah, all I can add is that these groups, because many of them formed a while ago, the Indigenous engagement wasn't as, you know, robust. But because we've started off at the beginning, as Scott says, and you'll see in the situation analysis, I think there's a great opportunity here from a much better collaboration.
Yeah, and then you saw Richard's question, and Ashley had just followed up saying that the High Valley Enhancement Fund is a great example of local funding. And Carmen, do you want to unmute for a moment? I can give the background on QS, but maybe you would like to do so and expand a little bit on your comment.
Thank you. Yeah, it's maybe not my place to give a background on Kamaltitish-Kwetmik G2G initiative, but certainly Sunny Laborde and that initiative is leading a lot of excellent conversation about land and watershed stewardship in the region. And I just think it would be imperative to include her voice in this conversation before moving forward. So I didn't see her group or that group as one of the listed interviewed organizations. So I just wondered if they had been involved in that.
Yeah, just to clarify that this presentation right now was about 10 conservation partnerships in other regions of British Columbia.
Oh, okay.
And the next presentation is based on 70 interviews. And yes, we did talk to Hunter Lamprey, was smiling there. We did talk to, at 15 Indigenous organizations. We approached 29, but we'll talk about it in the next presentation, if that's okay. But you can add, Hunter has his name on, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I can just provide a comment on that, in that I do work under the government-to-government agreement that Sunny, who is my director, is the current lead of, and I do see a lot of potentially similar, potentially diverted efforts and mirrored initiative under this. I've been writing them down pretty steadily, and I know that not only through the government-to-government agreement, but the more provincial wildlife and habitat specific work that I've participated in, a lot of these actions have a house. They're all placed somewhere under a provincial commitment to work on. And rather than just writing them in the chat, I can reference a couple quickly. The provincial wildlife strategy, being Together for Wildlife, has 20 actions, 20 plus actions it commits to advancing. Action 5 being about universities and the provincial commitment to support wildlife stewardship research. Action 9 being a commitment to fund on the ground stewardship. In that those exist and we acknowledge that. The biggest piece that's missing is, and I reflect on my great grandmother Mary Thomas's words on this, is everybody just getting together in a circle, being hand in hand and working on these things. We haven't had that in the Thompson-Nicola, and that's why I'm currently here, is that I know this is one opportunity to do so. This is one opportunity to take a look at the more regional scale of what's wrong, and identify as a group, okay, the top 3 things that are plaguing this area are habitat, soil sedimentation in a river, whatever it is, and identify the first 2 things you need to do to better protect those. And it's a shame that truthfully, the whole Thompson-Nicola plateau, once you're out of those red areas in the river valleys, is a moonscape of pathetic forestry regulation, because that would have made a lovely Indigenous protected conservation area. It's just been logged to the point that I don't have a lot of appeal in being the proud namesake of an Indigenous protected conservation area that is just habitat regenerated cut blocks. And with that said, I do want to sort of circle back to the comment about the QSG2G group. I know that we're currently looking at leading a stewardship forum and focusing more on the territories of our signatories broadly, which this is encompassing of. But I can definitely take all of this back to Sunny. I do talk to her every day and make sure she's aware.
Thanks, Hunter. Thank you. I didn't see that you were on the call. I should have asked you for an introduction to the G2G, which you just gave. So I appreciate that. And that was a great background for everybody and steps to move forward as well, which is appreciated. Does anybody else have any questions or comments at this time for Susan and Scott? I think you'll find there's more information presented in the presentation after the break as well.
Yeah, just, the full lessons learned document is available. It was sent to you and it's also on the website. And we spent a lot of time with the graphic designer to make it readable. It's all bullet points, lots of nice photos. So we really encourage you to have a look at it. There are lots of really good suggestions, very specific.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that from working in a conservation organization for about 5 years, I know we've got 45 or 50 people in this group. It's not about all of us working on the same projects. It's about different groups, who have a great perspective of what the priorities are. And then we break into smaller groups and all work on it together. But at least we're all communicating and working towards similar goals, and we all know what we're doing. And I think that's the power of a collaborative conservation program.
Okay. We're only 3 minutes behind. That's pretty good. So we're gonna break now. So we'll still give everybody 10 minutes. So if everybody could come back at 5 after 11 or technically 4 after 11, but we'll say 5 after 11. And we'll get started on the final presentation, and there'll be another question and answer period. So we will see you all back here in 10 minutes. Stretch your legs and get a coffee. Thank you. For those who are back, welcome, but we're going to give it another minute just to give it that full 10 minutes. If anybody has any questions while we're waiting, I'm sure Susan would be happy to answer, and Jamie and Scott. We've got the website up as well that you can have a look at on the screen there, so you know what it's about.
I sort of have one. I did message it to Scott directly. It was just around, because before the break he'd mentioned, and this isn't verbatim per se, but this group could operate as a specific check-in on projects and offering support for each other's work. And I do get the value in that and maintaining the momentum of each of our respective initiatives. But I think alongside that would be clearly defining how this group advocates for policy and legislative changes that would make those efforts more efficient or successful is a critical component. Especially since there's no SARA legislation in BC, and in my experience, there isn't a ton of appetite for that politically. So,
yeah, I would definitely support that. That's what our organization is almost all about. It's about working together, even though we're working, say, on a connectivity initiative, which there's no legislation anywhere to say that habitats have to be connected in Canada or the US. So it's something that local groups can all work together at all levels of government to really bring awareness to these big issues and actually start advocating for new policies that support better practices overall.
it's almost like the Crown government is built on an Indian burial ground with how much issue they have.
Hunter, I talked to 70 organizations, and you can imagine you weren't the only one to bring up this kind of thing. And I had to reflect it in the next presentation. You'll see that it's there because my job was to reflect what I heard. Tried to do it in a nuanced way, but yeah, the message was clear.
Well, Susan, with that, then why don't we move to your presentation, and we'll hear what the outcomes were.
Yeah, so just before that, I just wanted to, in case you haven't been to our web page, we're very grateful that Thompson-Okanagan Tourism Association is hosting a web page until things get going. And this is the page. They made it look quite beautiful. And if you haven't looked at the reports, you can click on them here or down here. The 3 reports we're presenting today, that Jamie, and then the 2 that I'm doing. So I will now get to my next presentation. So this, we're just for short, we'll call it the situation analysis. And this is the one that's based on talking with folks that work in the Thompson-Nicola. This is the report. If you clicked on that website page, this is the report that would pop up with our lovely bird. And this is a quick overview on what I'm going to do. It'll be roughly a little bit longer than the previous, about 15 to 18 minutes, I hope. First, I'm going to talk about how I did it. And then these are basically the questions that I asked to people. What are the values and threats? Are you interested in forming some sort of collaboration? What could the goals and objectives be? What kind of governance do you think would work in the Thompson-Nicola? Possible program areas. And this is all up for discussion. So this was just to do background work and give you something to work with. So we've already gone over the goal of phase 1 was just to provide this background information that you can use if you want to launch a group. The goal of this piece was to assess the situation in the region, including what people think the priorities are and what kind of options for collaboration they would like to see. It was based on 70 interviews, more than 60 organizations representing everyone that's listed here. And how do I move this so I can see my own screen? Just a second. Oh, there it is. Let me move that away. All right. Yeah, it was a wide spread of interviews. The first list I was given had 20 organizations on it. And then the more we went, people said, well, you should talk to so-and-so and you should talk to so-and-so. And people would contact me, can I have an interview? So there was a lot of interest, and but it's not finished. Their comments are welcome on these results. So the topics I asked were what I just mentioned earlier, the same chapters as that I'm going to talk about today. These are the sections in the situation analysis. If you read it, each of these sections responds to what I heard on these topics. I've highlighted sections 5 to 8 because those are the ones we're going to discuss in event number 2. Come to event number 2 because we're going to look at what did people say about these 4 things and what do you think? Do you agree? Can you ground truth? Do you disagree? Should you throw things out? So those are the focus areas for the next one. The role of this paper is a discussion paper. Any comments you have, you might say we disagree or we'd like to add, will all be put in the launch report, and that will be posted along with these reports on the web page. It also can be used, the people who get involved at the next stage can look into more of the details, because this report, again, with pretty pictures, is still 30, 40 pages, but there are lots of detailed ideas in there that can be used by the founding members. Again, it's a synthesis of what I heard. It is not my views nor the views of the working group. And I do include many quotes. So what did we hear? Priority ecosystems, if we had done a word cloud, it would have come up over and over again, grasslands, wetlands, including riparian areas, of course, ponds, etc. Species at risk, but also other species. People said, we don't want to just focus on the specific areas at risk. We want to take an ecosystem, they would use the term ecosystem, or a landscape approach, a whole, more holistic approach. And this was a big step back from the sort of individual species at risk, strategies, which I guess were important and a good start. But this is consistent with what Canadian Wildlife Service is hoping to do. They also talked about watershed management. This comes back to Hunter's comment. Many people said we can't just focus on the at-risk grasslands. We have to look at the uplands and the forests and how it all relates. The clear message is that conserving critical habitat for species at risk will also benefit other species, and the phrase keep common species common, which is I really like that. It's good messaging. For Indigenous groups, very similar priorities, but more emphasis on habitat and connectivity, habitat enhancement and protection for salmon, steelhead, and also ungulates, habitat and connectivity. And the focus there being food security, community well-being, and increased biological productivity, both reserve and territory land. The threats, everybody pretty much zeroed in. Jamie already mentioned these. Subdivision, a lot of it is incremental stuff, which is hard to address, but may be useful for a regional group. Subdivision of large rural land holdings, urban expansion, and then the conversion of these dry lands and the fragmentation. Poorly planned and managed natural resource activities. This kind of goes without saying, but the opportunities are there, as I mentioned earlier, to look at stewardship activities and protection measures across the landscape. So clearly in some areas, some of the sectors are either poorly planned or bad practices on range forests, degrades terrestrial and aquatic habitats. There was a lot of mention of increased road building, access into Crown land and backcountry, and combined with more recreational users, some of whom are not from the area, maybe don't have the same sensitivity about habitat protection, and a lot of under-resourcing on the provincial side, meaning weak and inconsistent monitoring and enforcement in the front country and the back country was mentioned many times, and invasives continue to be an issue. The key drivers behind this, what are the pressures? Biologists talk about, ecologists talk about the drivers behind some of these threats. Climate change was mentioned often by the people in the area as a large factor, cross-cutting driver, which is magnifying the issues that you're all seeing this, increased flooding, drought, and wildfire. And this all has impacts on aquatic and terrestrial habitats. And also if you're doing conservation work, climate change is shifting species, which really starts to mess up your efforts. Many people mentioned when I asked this question, gaps and weaknesses in the provincial institutional framework, which again, we just discussed. The whole framework of federal, provincial, and local government and Crown land, private land, there are opportunities there. What they said was that is a driver in a sense, because the management could be improved. But what a great opportunity this will be. If key parties are involved, then that could be addressed. And this includes provincial land managers, Crown managers, all of the sectors. I didn't mention here mining and extractive, and this would include Crown land tenure holders, also private land holders. Is there interest? Unbelievable, yes. Huge, yes. Out of the 70 people I talked to, 69 would like to stay involved. And I won't say who the 70th person was. Across sectors, across groups, there was great enthusiasm and people really want something tailored to the area, but they're interested in knowing what was done elsewhere and drawing on it. The main benefits they saw, as I said, were similar to the lessons learned, but the 4 that really came out was just this whole thing of getting to know each other. Like Hunter said, getting in the room, holding hands, finding out what everybody's doing. A lot of people know of each other or they know each other, but they want to have that contact. They feel that could be more effective, that they could pool their resources and their complementary expertise. And there's the point that Hunter mentioned, a greater collective influence on policies at 3 levels of government and practices by private and public parties. Regional strengths, the contact list, which I will be handing over to this project, to this group of people that takes over, includes 120 individuals with all their contact information from over 75 or more organizations. In the appendix of this document, I've tried to give an overview of who these groups are. I describe each of the sectors, government, academia, Indigenous groups, and I talk about what they can bring to the partnership and what expertise and their interests, and there are some links in there to existing partnerships that are already going on, Roundtable in the Nicola and historic groups like that. I took a bunch of phrases and words that people said that they thought this group could do, and this is very draft, and I formulated them into some goals and objectives. These are completely up for grabs, and they're one of the things we want to talk about in events 2A and B. But these were themes that came out that they're just like the proverbial straw person that you can really work together on and see how they fit together. Maybe a goal should be moved to an objective. Maybe this can all be put into one, really up to you. But the clear theme is this strengthening of grassland wetland protection and including species at risk, but other species. Again, this phrase ecosystem approach or whole of landscape approach. Watershed management came up over and over again. Maybe it's the same thing as ecosystem approach. I don't know. You can talk about that. But certainly watershed units are a common way that people do ecosystem work. And it really a focus on this integrating conservation into natural resource planning and management by Crown and non-Crown decision makers. I don't know how to say this word. Somebody said it. Anyway, somebody can tell me after this. That it's the concept of lands and waters, or the integration. Who can say it for me? Thank you. Came up over and over again, certainly in the interviews with Indigenous groups, and it seems like a powerful parallel to the other 2 messages, and hopefully this can be integrated somehow. Possible objectives, these are, so the goals are like, where do we want to go? The objectives are, how do we get there? What are we going to do together to get to those goals? And these were 5 that came out. One is just, let's do a lot of communication, dialogue, meeting together, and coming up with our common goals to define those goals. Secondly, just coordinating our activities, finding out who can work with whom, looking for collaborative opportunities, maybe like Scott said, not with the whole group, but a subgroup. Thirdly, providing a leadership role. and almost you can't be advocates because as NGOs and stuff, you can't, but a leadership role saying, here's a common direction. Here are things we want to do together. And here are some strategies we'd all like to be part of. And it sounds like some are already in place with the provincial wildlife initiative. Fourthly, just reducing duplication and combining efforts. And as I mentioned earlier, capacity building. And that could be formal or informal. This is a group doing waterfowl surveys on a lake. Governance. These are things you'll have to decide. These are things that popped up. So these are questions that we have for you in event number 2. What should the structure look like? Should it be like in other areas where they have 2 tiers? Should it be more of a round table kind of feeling? What should the name be? We've been using the word initiative because we just wanted to keep it open. You as a group may decide you want to call it a collaborative, a program, a partnership, or you might like initiative. It's up to you. What would the model look like? Now, all we hope to do in the next couple of workshops is to move this forward the next step. No final decisions have to be made. This is just trying to take a set of recommendations forward. Should there be action teams on specific topics, as Scott mentioned? What kind of a document do people want to work on that gets things started? It was highly recommended by all 70 people I talked to, or maybe 60 of them, that there be a full-time coordinator of some kind, a contractor or someone who can just serve the initiation function. And at some point, you'll have to look at long-term funding. There's support for this initial step, but that will be something you have to decide. And how do we get all this going? Does the leadership group sit down, or do you form a governance committee? And of course, you've all been part of this, so it'd be interesting to know your experience in the past. Other issues to decide are the boundaries. People said, James talked about this, it was okay to start out with TNRD boundaries, but it's really a large area and very diverse landscapes and issues and communities. And especially this point here is that many of the groups really just work on our area specific. And it's for the Indigenous people I talked to, the representatives, they said, we have very diverse territories and priorities, and we really know our areas best, and we want to weigh in on an area's best, but we want to talk and coordinate. So that all has to be thought through. Some people said maybe we should just start on the priority areas where the greatest threats are. So the at-risk areas or areas that are not getting attention by current initiatives. This is something we're going to talk about in 2. Other things are in terms of members. Who's going to be part of this? We can call them members, participants, partners. You have to decide the name. And then how do you get them involved? Well, one of the main things they said was make sure people know this is not government driven. Sorry to say, but that was important, really important to people. They want to know that it's going to have its own voice, that will collectively decide its own governance and direction. Try to help the group show that, yeah, this will help them with their own goals and programs, and it has in other regions. Who to engage? As was discussed in lessons learned, try to get diversity, including the kind of core, all of us conservation geeks, but also the people who manage the land base and whose decisions are going to affect biodiversity. So the decision makers. How to get those committed leaders and champions. This is what we're hoping in this workshop series, is to find the people that are really gung-ho on this. How to build those relationships early on. As I said, other groups said, get face-to-face, get out and have a field trip. This was our original plan. We were going to have a workshop and then sort of a half-day field trip. And finally, how to get those elected folks and leaders involved early. Indigenous engagement. So I'm glad we're now addressing, this was brought up earlier. Everyone sees this as essential, of course. We did get in touch with 29 groups who mostly are in the dry interior from the map there, and we had 15 interviews. There are another at least 6 or 8 from that group that said, please keep in touch. We're interested in seeing how things go. We may join on. We certainly want to hear about how it goes. The caveat, of course, is if title and rights and government commitments to an UNDRIP and the BC commitment to the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act must be respected. Some people have said, we would prefer to work mostly with G2G, government to government, because that's where our focus is, but we'll wait and see how it evolves and keep in touch. What was the clear message was that the groups that want to be involved said, really separate it from the government to government. Make sure it's seen as a technical collaboration with mostly technical people, staff level involved. Also highlight what benefits could be for the community and make sure that there's support available for participation. Possible program areas. So this is the last couple of slides of what's the kind of thing you could work on. These are again listed more or less in order of how quickly they came up. Clearly one. Number two, there's lots of interest in, hey, we have some great data, but we're not sharing it with anyone. Even some of the Indigenous communities I talked to said, we are doing lots of monitoring and we'd like to know what's going on in adjacent communities, Indigenous or not, on Crown land. We'd like to get some data protocols in place so that we can really start to work together on that kind of thing. The universities are extremely keen to do some collaborative work with community groups. Securement, great partnerships here get formed by the land trusts and the conservancies working to acquire or either acquire or get access to a protected area, but then have the local stewardship groups get involved in managing, doing stewardship, doing education, public outreach. This already happens in the Thompson-Nicola with the Grasslands Conservation Council has done a lot of this work. And the Nicola Roundtable, Nicola Valley Roundtable. Some people are interested in having a regional conservation plan or strategy. People said, you know, it doesn't have to be a big, long process. We have lots of good information. It could be a quick start using the information on Dyer and the document, which is Orv Dyer's document that Jamie presented, and then his bibliography. Plus, all of you have lots of data. I talked to people who said, we've got great mapping. We'd love to bring it to people, but we just have it like on our computer. Stewardship programs are seen as huge because of the large percentage of private land. There are some in place already, SARPAL, FRISP, the environmental farm. I've got them listed in the document, and those could be expanded because many of those are focused on species at risk. So people say, why not expand it more to ecosystem level? Why not expand it to new audiences? Why not get conservation groups working more with the ranching groups to prepare that material and to go out to the community? We've already mentioned working with local government. They are interested and they're open. Both the TNRD, I talked to Merritt and Kamloops, and they're really interested in this initiative. They want to go slowly and find out more about it. Nobody wants to commit money yet, and that's fine, right? You just say, it's okay. It's all about meeting. And what's really great is there's already a species at risk, SEIR, species and ecosystems at risk, local government working group that the FLNRO has been running, and they are keen to have Thompson-Nicola join if this gets going. And then you can share ideas with what other regions are doing. Other possible areas, and there it is, Hunter, number 7, strengthening the provincial regulatory policy and planning framework. It came up frequently. People are aware of areas that need work, and they would like to work with government and to complement what's government doing in a more systematic way. People are doing all this stuff, but how can like I said, the under-resourced agencies get complemented by government work, academic work, Indigenous groups, the work that people are already doing. Lots of people say, let's do our work in the Thompson-Nicola, but there are lots of international things going on. If we gather data on migratory birds or wildlife corridors, let's connect with what's going on in BC, Canada, and internationally. But the first thing that's right up on the table right now is Canadian Wildlife Service is going to be doing, and that's Todd Kemper, who's on the call, an integrated conservation action plan for this area in 2021-22. And part of that process is engaging all the local stakeholders, Indigenous groups, government, and this could be a conduit. This conservation partnership could be a conduit for reaching those people and possibly strategizing with CWS on how to make a really systematic involvement with that plan. Invasives, always an issue and lots of people interested. Of course, outreach, and a big theme, which actually should be up higher, but is enhancing Indigenous participation and conservation in the region. There's already lots going on. Many groups are involved with salmon enhancement, restoration, forestry, all the resource issues. They've been involved in a lot of the large mega project environmental assessments. So there's a lot of data and there's a lot of interest. And so building capacity, linking to food security, economic development, and jobs. An example was given that a lot of people have been trained on environmental monitoring for these big mega projects, but when the project's over or built, then you have all these trained people and there are no jobs for them. So wouldn't it be great if they could get involved in biodiversity, data collection and monitoring? And then, this is a controlled burn, picture of a controlled burn. There's already some work going on with the Forest Enhancement Society, Indigenous, might be Clementi, I'm not sure who it is, you can tell me, and the provincial government on looking at controlled burns. So that's it, I think. Just a second, possible programs. Yeah, that's it.
That's great, Susan, thank you.
Oh, wait a minute, I forgot my conclusions and next step.
Okay, go for it.
I don't know why it wasn't there. Slideshow from current slide. There it is. All right, so there's my grand finale. Regional collaborative body is an idea whose time has come. There's strong interest and people really think this could make a difference. Phase 1 is a great start because what did we see? We saw quite a bit of convergence between the scientific study and what people just said on what are the priority ecosystems and the key threats. We've gone through those already. We have a great science basis to get started on already. We have strong strengths and assets in the area, a lot of history of people working together and initiatives that are going on right now that can be built on. There's a general direction. Yeah, people have a sense that the structure and the goal and objectives, but details can be worked out. And on top of that, you can draw on the advice of the 9 existing collaborative partnerships. And I really encourage you to read those 2 documents or glance over them, or even read the executive summaries before the next events. And thank you all for your time and your enthusiasm. It was palpable, even though it was on Zoom.
Thanks, Susan. So we've had a number of comments and questions in the chat, and Lynn also has a question. So I'll just go through the chat first, let Lynn ask, and then we'll see who's next. So Celia commented, personally, I think the Thompson-Nicola in the title makes it sound like a government, example, regional district run right away. So perhaps changing that could be a first step. It's hard to keep track of all the different level of government involvements. And she suggested like dry interior as a suggestion. And there was a number of people that agreed with Celia's comment. So I will let you respond.
I don't think that's up to me. It's really up to this group to decide.
Okay, so should we add that to the information that's taken back?
Yes, absolutely. And in event number 2, we literally have a question that the groups will be discussing is what should the name of the group be?
Perfect.
What area should it cover? What should the title, should it be a program? So that is all up for grabs.
Perfect. That's great. Okay. And then Todd mentioned that he would actually say that this partnership and its members should tell the CWS, Todd, what to do rather than have the CWS try to reinvent the wheel. So just putting that out there in case anybody missed it in the chat. And it looks like Tracy's question was answered and a link provided. So that's great. So Lynn, what was your question or comment?
Thanks. I just wanted to say you mentioned during your presentation, Susan, so it's called the SEER Local Government Working Group. Sorry, it's an 8-letter acronym. Nobody wanted to change the name. It's been around for over a decade. And I just wanted to reiterate it's environment, actually, not Flynn Rowe. That's okay. It doesn't matter. We are partners. And the Thompson So Dan Wallace is the contact right now. I see Mike. I don't know, Mike, if we've chatted before, but we already have TNRD. They've been on for a long time. Dan's been active for a long time. And a variety of other, not every local government, but we have a fairly good representation for the area. But if anybody knows any local governments that are interested in hearing more, there is a little website. Just Google the letters SEAR-LGWG and talk to me if you have any questions.
And Lynn, is it true that the coordinators of the conservation programs often sit in on that meeting?
They do, absolutely. And they're considered they're not like, they're observers. Just like State OES sits as an observer, because it's meant to be a sort of direct dialogue between the provincial government and local government specifically, to try and help them with things like their planning tools and such. And there have been discussions about how we can integrate more Indigenous, partnerships. And what we do is we encourage local governments to do that at their level. So when they're looking at their local or regional area, just because some of the tools we talk about are only available right now for local governments. So yeah, but we're really open to hear suggestions on that as well.
Jamie, hopefully put your link in the chat box as well, Lynn.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Nobody has to memorize it.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lynn. And so Tracy has put a comment into, and I'm facilitator only here today. So other members of the province that are on the call, wondering if the following monitoring of the LRMP was done. So section 3, an annual meeting will then be held to review the report and solicit public comments. Plan updates and unscheduled amendments may occur where appropriate up until the scheduled amendment 8 years after implementation of this plan. A revised Kamloops LRMP will be completed by the 10th year. So was this completed? Jamie or other?
I don't have any idea, and I'm guessing not, because this was sort of, and Scott's shaking his head. And if Robin or Shauna knows any of the why it wasn't done.
Yeah, I probably, maybe Shauna can add on as well. Maybe between the three of us, we can give a partial answer. I do think that in general, the kind of provincial land use planning kind of stopped at some point, not too many years after the Kamloops LRMP was completed. And so all that kind of work on land use planning, including the monitoring, I think was not completed. Of course, a couple of years ago, the province announced the modernized land use planning initiative, which has just been getting going over the last couple of years, and focused on collaborations with Indigenous peoples. And the one that's active so far in our region is the Nicola pilot in the Nicola. Yeah, so Shauna, did you want to add anything?
Thanks.
I don't think I have too much else to add to that either, Robin. I think you pretty much covered it, that there's just some new initiatives now started up, but yeah, that we're involved with.
Okay.
So is that kind of a political thing where one government supports land use planning and then it kind of falls out of favor, and then so those commitments don't get followed up on, and then a new government comes in and decides, yes, it's a good thing to do? Is that how that happens?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that would be, I guess, one way of kind of thinking about it, I guess. Yeah, I think I think I was around, like when I started, land use planning had already been kind of completed and wasn't really super active anymore for a couple of years. So I don't exactly know how it happened.
Okay.
But in general, yeah, I think the kind of work on the land use plan stopped for whatever government reason.
Those who had been around the whole time, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I think I'm probably been around the longest in government, but yeah. So LRMPs, and then there was LRUPs that were created under the local plans, and a lot of people there was a lot of investment in those LRUPs, and a lot of clients still make reference to them. They were never made a higher level plan, but we still make reference to them a lot because they provided a lot of guidance from the community. Like licensees for many people were involved in it, outdoor groups. Then again, like they were saying, the Liberals did come in, planning went by the wayside. We still are mandated to manage the LRMP because it is a higher level plan. So we do have to continue to make reference to it. And I still make reference to the UPs because they were such valuable and provided a lot of hands-on direction on those local plans. But planning is coming back to life, and there's a lot of talk of updating the MPs and the UPs. So that's the history of it.
Thanks, Noelle. I should have said this at the beginning. Not everybody on the call is with government and knows our acronyms. So maybe if you can define the UP and the MP for everybody on the call.
Please don't make me. Land Resource Management Plan.
Yeah,
that's LRMP.
Local Resource Use Plan.
Use Plan. Okay.
That was the wild ass guess.
That's good. Just so you know.
That's a good point, Noelle. I just thought I'd add on. There are some legal parts of the Kamloops one that are still legal and used specifically in forestry for some wildlife species. So those are still in use in that way.
Everything from the LRMP is legal. We must follow. It is a legal higher level plan. And then there's other pieces of legislation, but the UPs were guidance.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Tracy had initiated this discussion and I believe had a follow-up question. And then there's another question in the chat box. Tracy, it's all yours.
No, I think it's kind of been answered. And I think the point being that this is probably a good point, if we're initiating new work and collaboration, working together to recognize that potentially some of these higher level plans that the province has used are incomplete or were not completed properly or outdated, and they should be revisited. So maybe there's opportunity.
Thanks, Tracy. So Carmen put in the chat, is funding available to support this collaborative initiative moving forward? Is there funding to facilitate moving the initiative into the next phase beyond the 2 remaining workshops that are planned and Susan's reports?
I can speak to that. My group with the province put in for some money, and I won't find out for probably a month or 2 whether we get it, but we do have some money tentatively approved or tentatively asked for from the federal government as well, tentatively approved pending notification. So yes.
So there's tentative funding there.
Which is like pretty much definitely gonna happen.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. And Hunter says that LRMP is older than I am. And in my short lifespan so far, I've seen an entire paradigm shift on land and resource management. Should be revisited isn't a question. Who has the time and capacity is. That is a good point, Hunter. And I'm not sure if that's something that the people on this group will be able to do, but I do think it's something that can be taken back to the province by the working group members that are provincial. Is that right, Jamie?
I don't know. There's not really, it's the role of this group won't, I mean, if it's to try and engage with policy and stuff, that's one thing. But my little voice saying, hey, people want to get back into this, looking at the LRMP, like I don't really have an avenue to the right people for that kind of moving up that thing. We can put it as a note that it's a priority, but I think this group would have more effect as a group putting those ideas forward.
Okay, Hunter, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to expand on that because there's obviously everybody has their own home front initiatives they're working on. If they're a fisheries manager for a nation, a counselor who holds the resources portfolio for a nation, if they're involved in a stakeholder organization devoted to sustainable management. regardless of those pieces, there is something to be said for our ability to generate recommendations as a group. Where we all hail from is pretty broad and encompassing of diversity. If we're all going to recommend that LRMPs from 1995 need to be updated, and that is something that our specific offices can agree to, not only have we made some traction, but we've provided a united voice in terms of what we all know needs to be changed. We shouldn't be guided by a document that predates me. It's not that I'm the cornerstone of a new age that is going to change things. It's just that that's sad. But if that's a recommendation we could all make eventually when we're through workshops, when we've identified a structure, I see traction in that, because it would be hard for government to look at a group of 40 participants from 35 different groups, be them First Nations, NGOs, ENGOs, whatever they are, and ignore them. I mean, after all, they are to be held accountable by people like us that give enough of a damn that they want to get involved. So.
Oh, yeah. And I would agree to that. And it's been a bit of a discussion amongst many of us because they are so dated, and planning was never, it literally went off our workload. And so there is an equal frustration on the provincial side as well, that they need to be updated for obvious reasons.
Thanks, Noel.
I would just chip in too. Certainly, I think part of my thesis back in 1992 was reviewing the environmental, basically, outcome of the LRMP for Kamloops, and basically it had major failings that were identified over a long-term period. So there's ample reason to go back and review it. Ever since it was started, there was a lot of failings about protecting the environment in it. So.
Thanks, Scott. And Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I know we're looking at LRMPs, but I'm thinking FERPA has all those tools in that toolbox there, that we should be really looking at FERPA as a higher level, and we're dealing with the regional managers for each region in those areas. So if people aren't familiar with FERPA, I would suggest looking at it and see what implications we can use out of there to create the accountability is being created. It's just a matter that we never use it. And I think that's something that's key, that we should be looking forward to how we can implement pieces of FERPA, because it's so diverse that we can actually come back to that accountability that where we need to and what this group's looking for, instead of kind of going down rabbit holes, for lack of a better word. I don't mean to offend anybody by that.
Oh, that's a good comment. Thanks, Chris. And Tracy put in the comment, it's problematic for the province to support Sarah if they stand by their LRMP decisions. So it sounds like there's a lot of room and need to reevaluate the LRMP. Are there any other comments or questions about Susan's presentation, or about anything else you've heard about today? We'll talk about next steps in the closeout, but are there any lingering questions now?
I could just add something about this discussion. I mean, I think it's really a rich discussion that people want to talk about. And if you look at, how these groups are structured, everybody said, every group's going to have a different interest. Some people just want to get out in the land and collect data and talk to each other. Other people are interested in land use policy and, what's going on. Other people are interested in sharing practices, stewardship. And that's where the sort of committee idea can come from, right? You could imagine a group that just wants to focus on land use planning and policy. And then you could have that discussion, bring in all these resources, the old LRMPs, talk about what's going on already. And then if it turns out that the entire group wants to talk about them, that's great too. But I think there's the idea is you allow options for people to be part of this that meets their needs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Susan. That's great. Any other questions or comments?
Kelly, I can just add a bit, just from my experience in the work currently I'm doing with planning under the Nicola Watershed Group. Initiatives like this will help inform that modernized planning. To what extent? probably not so much involvement, but it is a key piece to informing those tools or new initiatives that are going to be needed to put in, especially around SAR, because that's going to be really critical to the overall planning process. And just having everybody together and having that input collectively is a bit more powerful than little groups here and there. So at least from what I'm seeing in my participation in this modernized planning, it's different than the old school land use management planning. I think we all know, at least from an Indigenous side, what the issues were there was no involvement in those development of those plans, and let alone stakeholders. So hopefully, and from what I'm seeing with this new modernized planning, that's a change. It's different. We want to look at building it together from the beginning rather than having something predetermined laid in front of us. So, seeing a little bit of light, and it sounds like there's lots of things going on within other areas. So just to bring everything together. So it ideally it would be all of BC, but we can start here with the Thompson-Nicola.
Thanks, Brian. I'm glad to hear that you see a little bit of light, that we're moving in the right direction, and even a little bit. Thank you. Anybody else? Any last thoughts before we let you know what's happening next? Carmen says this is an ambitious proposal initiative, and it'll be interesting to see how we look a year from now. Yes, it will. And Tracy made a comment about all the good work and the reports that were done. So thank you for that. Okay. Well, I really appreciate, and I know the working group does as well, all of the input everybody gave today and the full participation. That's great. We really appreciate it because it's off to a good start, especially as Jamie said, following a long weekend when we got started. So you had a lot of really interesting material presented to you today and an opportunity to ask some thoughtful questions. Before we close out though, I'd like to just remind you what's next. So if you haven't had an opportunity already to sign up for the second workshop, please do so. It's not too late. Remember to just sign up for one of the group 2. So there's 2A and 2B in the invitations. It's just to give you an option of different days and times. And this next workshop is going to be really interactive. You're going to work in small groups, as Susan and Jamie have mentioned, to discuss the key ideas from the reports that you heard about today. And these are based on those 70+ interviews that Susan has conducted. And the goal is to take everything from these workshops into the launch and provide a direction for this new regional conservative. So the working group kindly asks that you review the situation analysis report, or as Susan said, at minimum, the executive summary before the next workshop, just to ensure that the discussions are productive and you're not, wasting your time. Everybody has an opportunity to add something to the discussions. The lessons learned report that you saw a part of today, that also is full of advice from similar groups like you saw. So that would be another great one to review before the next workshop if you have time. And Jamie did email those reports out in the invitation, and you saw them again on the website that Susan showed you earlier today. So a recording of today's event will be posted on the website by tonight. And please feel free to invite colleagues to events 2 and 3, or they can watch the recording to catch up. You can contact Jamie to sign up if you haven't already. And of course, the working group welcomes comments and feedback on today. And actually a survey monkey will be sent out, so you have an easy way to provide feedback from today. Are there any questions about next steps, or any questions about the next 2 workshops if you haven't signed up already? Any technical questions? Okay, anything from, Susan or anybody else in the working group?
Yeah, we haven't talked about event number 3. But event number 3 will be the grand finale, where we try to summarize. We haven't even planned it in detail yet because we want to see what comes out of event 2. So all the small group work, we're going to be madly studying that for 5 days and pulling it together. And then we're going to say, were there themes here? Were there decisions that came out? Have they taken the information and taken it to the next step? That's what we're hoping. And then bring it to the group again, and probably a mixture of small group and plenary, to say, okay, what are the decisions? What are the next steps? And we are literally hoping to make lists of who wants to sign up. I'll sign up for a steering committee, or I'll lead an action group. I won't lead it, but I'll be on it. Or we just want to be informed. Like, we just want to really try to get commitments. It's tough when it's virtual, but this hopefully will seg us into an in-person workshop or meeting sometime this year, or who knows. But that third one, again, people can still sign up for it, and that'll be really the result, getting the results.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susan. Scott or Jamie, do you have anything that I missed that you wanted to jump in and add?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, the next workshops are going to be, even though we're in smaller groups, they are going to be still facilitated by someone from the working group who's been here all along. So,
good point. Jamie, anything?
No, thanks, Kelly, for bringing it all back together so nicely. The one thing is, I guess, that I would mention is that at the next workshop, we are using a virtual whiteboard to record, so everyone can have their say and record what they want to say about any given topic and stuff. We'll also can have verbal answers and things like that. It's called Mural, and I'll do a little intro at the beginning about how to use it, but it's basically just a way that we can all write on a virtual whiteboard in real time and see what it's like, instead of a flip chart at a in-person workshop.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I didn't ask this in advance, so Brian, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but would you like to do a closeout or a closing prayer to end the day?
Sure, I can just do a quick one.
Thank you.
I'd like to give thanks to the Creator for bringing us here today and taking care of the land and the Tamiuk, and taking care of all of us here today. And hope to see everybody in the next little bit and on this great initiative, and everybody take care. Bye.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
The working group wants to stick around, stick around. You can do a post.
I got a few minutes. Someone booked me a meeting during that meeting right after this meeting. So.
I have a problem with having assistants. They book you meetings when you're in meeting.
So just
Yeah, so I think you can see sort of, once we get into the discussions, it's going to be unlimited of what people are, they know what we need to deal with and what we can tackle. So I think it'll go quite smoothly once we just start the discussions.
Susan, can you stop the recording as well?